Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Hauler Talk. It's been a while. We missed you guys. I am NASCAR's Mike Ford, joined as always by Amanda Ellis. Amanda, how are you?
Hello. I am fresh off a week at the beach, so I'm actually doing great.
Very good. And Nate Ryan, NASCAR.com writer, AP writer, NBCSports.com writer. How you doing, my friend?
I'm doing well. Good to be back on Hauler Talk. Thanks for letting me contribute.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So we missed last week's episode for obvious reasons. I don't know about obvious reasons, but we missed it because Amanda decided to take a vacation, and I guess we allow that. But in all seriousness, so we joked, I think 3-4 episodes ago that we hinted that Amanda's has a close relative who is in the NASCAR garage, and that is her husband, John Ellis, is a car chief on the number 6 car. And so in all seriousness, she needed to take that week off because, as you all know, this is an exhausting schedule, and this is probably the longest gauntlet in NASCAR history, probably 28 straight weeks here coming up. So well-deserved week off for Amanda. Was it a good week off?
It was great weather. We went to the Panhandle in Florida. So yeah, it was great. To your point, it was great to have John home for a week, which never really happens in our household. So we enjoyed the time away. I do think he was itching to get back, though, a whole week with just me and our child. I'm sure he was ready to work on race cars again, but it was a great week. So
I love that you texted me on the drive home saying that you tried to hit a racetrack on the way home, didn't you?
We did. Yes, we did take a detour on our way home on Saturday night. We tried to hit a local racetrack in Alabama, a dirt track, and it was actually closed for Easter, so we didn't get to check that out. But it would have been fun, I think. It was like a true, true kind of southern racetrack. It was a really nice kind of setup they had going. So I would have liked to have been able to pop in there. But yeah, I did text you and say, we would even hit a racetrack on Easter. And you texted me back and said a racer is going to race, which is so true. So,
yeah.
But like you said, I missed everybody last week. Nate, we missed connecting with you and getting your thoughts. So I think before we move into Rockingham, which was this past weekend, I think it would be nice to go back to Bristol and touch on a little bit of, the action we saw there, which was truly Kyle Larson and his dominance, dominating performance, I should say, at Bristol. So I was at Bristol, was there that weekend. Ford, you were a part of majority of the meetings that happened post Bristol. So you want to maybe kick us off where we are now, and we can continue that discussion around that race.
I will. And I think part of the reasons we also wanted to skip last week's, racers going to race, podcasters are not going to podcast. We definitely decided to take some time on this one because we wanted to see if there was going to be any more information coming out as the week progressed. And I think that information is still being formalized and formulated and poured over. Obviously, a lot of discussion coming out of Bristol about the quality of the race and the quality of short track racing in general. And I will say loud and clear that NASCAR is aware of that, and and we largely agree that we wish it was better as well, and they are working on it. So prior to this episode, I gave a call to Elton Sawyer just to see Elton Sawyer, the senior vice president of competition for NASCAR, just to see where we're at, if there was anything that the listener here of Hauler Talk should know. And what he said was, well, for certain, John Probst, who is the chief racing development officer at NASCAR, so that title is he leads our competition team, and so he tests the folks in the back, as we call it at the R&D center. So R&D center is kind of split by two different factions. There's a gigantic center bay, we call it. That's where we do all our teardown inspections. The front sides is sort of our executive team. So the series directors, John Probst, Elton Sawyer, Tom Swindell, Scott Miller, that side. Amanda and I are on the front side as well. And in the back's all our engineers. And they are the ones who really do the heavy lifting on any changes, tweaks that need to be done from an aero standpoint. Our safety engineers are back there. Our vehicle design folks and Brandon Thomas's team is back there. So John Probst last week after the Bristol race did task those folks in the back to look at everything. Nothing concrete specific to talk about just yet, but he said, look at every lever that you could possibly pull and pull them. And I think what was interesting last week, if you listen to the morning drive on Sirius XM NASCAR radio, Elton Sawyer was on Tuesday morning, and he made a point that I thought was very interesting. And in discussions with Brandon Thomas as well, he said the same thing. So you heard on Denny Hamlin's podcast, for instance, that we need to lift the front. We need to lower the front because right now all the cars are trying to have the front as high as possible because that diffuser is where a lot of that downforce is made. So when you do that, I was talking to Brandon, when you do that, there are some unintended consequences. In a vacuum, that's a good idea. But if you do that, that affects another part of the car that will mess up the balance, mess up a lot of the R&D that the teams have already done. So there's a lot of if-thens when you're talking about solves for the short track package. Long story short, a lot of words to say, a lot of work is being put into it. NASCAR is aware of it. And, I think Dale Jr. in his podcast put it well. He said, it's clear that some things needs to be fixed, and I have full confidence that NASCAR will fix it. And I think that was a really positive way to put a bow on this because there was a lot of negativity at the beginning of last week. And I'm not killing anyone for being negative because that is, there's passionate people in this sport. But I think to be clear that NASCAR is aware and is working on it is really the message to be delivered out of that one race, which was not a great watch. The statistics were on par with other Bristol races, to be honest with you. I know people crush me for talking about passing stats, but if you look at the passing stats, which are our apples to apples, we've been taking these passing stats since 2005, and the track has been this way since 2007. Pretty on par. But when you have the leader lead 411 laps, that is something to talk about.
Minor correction there. 2012, they actually, it wasn't a complete overhaul, but they did change Bristol in 2012, where they diamond grinded part of it. Yeah. Well, 2007 was when what you're talking about is right. Like 2007 is when Bristol was permanently altered in some capacity with the progressive banking. And then 2012, they tried to shift it so that it went back to being bottom lane dominant. And what it resulted in was like the top lane became kind of dominant for a few years there. And obviously I don't want to go down the rabbit hole of Bristol changes because there's about 1,000 things you could discuss from there. And traction compound is part of that discussion as well. But yeah, no, I appreciate what you're saying there, Ford, though, about everything else in terms of state of short track racing and trying to address it from the NASCAR perspective. One discussion I thought was big coming out of Bristol was about tire wear and about the need to have more of it, and that would create comers and goers and more passing naturally. And I think one of the reasons, not to spill the soup and get you guys in trouble, although that's always my goal on this show, I think one of the reasons we delayed the podcast was there was a meeting with Goodyear and NASCAR after Bristol. I presume, is there a weekly meeting between Goodyear and NASCAR after every race? And was there anything that came out of that after Bristol?
There's a standing meeting at 9:30 a.m. every Tuesday after every race. So nothing specific came out of that meeting. Right now, there isn't a tire test on the books, but in talking with Goodyear, if they feel that they need another one, the thing is, test. This is Mike Ford speaking, so I'm not speaking for Goodyear or even NASCAR here, but maybe a little bit for NASCAR, but. We just had a tire test last year after what happened in March and made some tweaks and then had what we had in the fall, which was another Kyle Larson dominant race. And then we had what we had here. So I'm not sure another tire test would be uber helpful. But Goodyear is kind of figuring out their plans for what we need to do on this one.
And, you mentioned as part of what Elton Sawyer and John Probst were saying, as part of that discussion about how it impacts teams and how if you make changes to the cars for short tracks, it can nullify their R&D. This might be a better question for Probst or Sawyer or Brandon Thomas or whoever, but is there some merit to, well, let's just make the changes? Because it seems like when teams aren't prepared as well, or when you throw a wrench into their millions of hours of simulation, it actually sometimes produces decent racing, I think, because when it's a jump ball, it's a good thing. And I'm sure the reaction to that, or the answer to that, is it's you want to be cost conscious. But any thoughts on that?
Yeah, and one thing I do want to add to the conversation about Bristol is, and I think this has been mentioned maybe in Elton's interview with Sirius, but we had a meeting, we met Saturday after practice with several people when we saw the tire wear, from the Cup Series practice. We had another meeting on Sunday morning following the Xfinity race. We had the Xfinity race on Saturday, kind of late afternoon. Sunday morning, we had a meeting pretty early in the day with, Goodyear was on the call. NASCAR was on the call. The track, Steve Swift, who obviously has been a guest of Holler Talk, was on the call with his team. Jerry Kaproff, who you'll hear us mention from time to time, was on the call as well with track prep and things like that. So we had a call that morning and discuss, some options. And the one thing I want, fans to know is, everyone was on the same page. There wasn't anyone who was like wanting to go a different direction or, everyone was on the same page. We had talked to drivers. I know specifically Denny was one of those. There was just a lot of conversation happening throughout that weekend and what people had, or what drivers had wanted, what teams had requested and asked for. When that race started and you were kind of anticipating which direction it would go, we knew pretty quickly that we were not going to necessarily be battling on Sunday what we battled on Saturday. The track temp was very different. It's hard to believe. I think that track temp can also impact the difference that much as well. Not saying that was the only thing, but it was one variable that was different from Saturday to Sunday. And so I just want fans to know that, like, when we started that race, I really truly felt like everyone was on the same page. Now, when you have a dominating performance like that, right or wrong, people may not be on the same page when we take the checkered flag, and that's okay. But at the beginning of that day, all those conversations were had, and everyone was in I felt like a really good spot. And I will also say, as someone who watched the race in person, I think Bristol in general, or maybe short tracks in general, and this is not a knock at our TV partner in Fox, because I think, they can only show so many things on TV, but Bristol is a track that I truly think is a great experience in person. I'm not saying that every fan that purchased a ticket, if you weren't a Kyle Larson fan, you probably didn't quite enjoy that race like a Kyle Larson fan did. But there was a lot of racing throughout the track, and there was a lot of passing, the lap cars. At one point, I know Larson had lapped, I think up to like 15th. So there was a lot of, I feel like, other things going on during that race that my gut says probably didn't make the broadcast for a variety of reasons. But I did see some fans on social media comment like, hey, maybe not my favorite Bristol race, but I was there. I still had a great time. There was still a lot of racing going on throughout the field. And I felt that very much the same. Like, not my favorite race at Bristol that I've been able to attend and watch, but it was a race that I felt like there was more action going on than maybe people that were viewing from home had the opportunity to see.
So more to come on that, whether it's, we've done a lot of short track testing from an aeros perspective. One of the things, you've heard was just take the diffuser off for short tracks. We did try that. We did test that. I believe it was of Richmond 2 years ago. Didn't do much during the test, but, as we've said, kind of in several instances, test conditions are different than race conditions. You look at, that's why we do the option tire, for instance, at Phoenix, where some may look at that as a gimmicky situation. We look at it as a real life and true data point that we can collect to figure out what kind of tire we want to use for the championship race, because the drivers are going all out, they're on the edge, so on and so forth. So at the test, from my understanding, when we did remove the diffuser, it didn't really change much from an aerodynamic perspective, but also it was a test. So who knows how hard those guys were going. They don't want to wreck their test car and so on and so forth. There's nothing on the line, right? So we test for a reason. It's to get those data points, and the data points from removing the diffuser really weren't that super promising. So there's work being done, and hopefully there will be more to come. And if there will, you'll hear it here first on Hauler Talk, NASCAR's hottest new podcast. So I think that is it for Bristol, and we can move on to the weekend's racing at Rockingham Speedway. I was not there. Amanda was not there. She was on the beach. Nate, I don't believe, was there, but we were able to follow it. And there was some news, lots of news, I guess, out of Saturday. 2 DQs, and a DQ from someone who finished, I think, like, 35th, 36th, Justin Bonsignor. So, yeah, I don't know. Where do we want to start? Nate, where do you want to start? Where do you want to contribute?
Let's start with the, scared to even pronounce it, Justin Bonsignor. Just my Justin high school French creeping in as I attempt to pronounce his name. Why don't you guys pronounce his last name for me?
Justin Bonsignor.
Okay, so this was somewhat surprising for it, and we talked about this before we started recording, because, as you said, he only made 157 laps, and he was knocked out in a crash, and then come to find out he's disqualified for a certain number of lug nuts being loose. And also, we should clarify here for the real casual fans who may not be fully aware of how this works. Like in Cup, you have 1 lug nut. In Xfinity trucks, you still have 5 lug nuts. So you still have penalties that are determined on a sliding scale based on how many lug nuts are loose. And I was unaware, or I guess I was just not fully up to speed. I should say unaware. Maybe I remember this back in the day, but like Ford had to explain to me that it's total number of lug nuts on the car that are missing. It's not just on one wheel. So in this case, there were 4 missing lug nuts across all 20 possible lug nuts on the 4 wheels, and that's what resulted in his disqualification.
That's right. Yeah. So, I'm kind of happy to be talking about this because this is something that, I can confidently say that there's probably no other podcasts that are talking about lug nuts in this depth.
Correct. And pronouncing the driver's name wrong while doing it. So, yeah.
While doing so. Yeah. So the rule book, there is a page in the rule book that lays out the penalty structure for lug nuts, specifically in Xfinity and truck. There are no lug nut penalties. As you mentioned, there's only 1 lug nut per car. So if there is a lug nut off, that means the tire is coming off. And then you have a penalty structure for that. But for Xfinity, if you have 1 lug nut off, and we base this off to 20 lug nuts, so 4 tires, 5 lug nuts per. So we base this on the 20 lug nuts. If there's 19 lug nuts safe and secure, that means you're getting a $5,000 fine. So that means 1 lug nut is not safe and secure. 18, it's a $10,000 fine, plus the crew chief is suspended for 1 race. So that's going to be 2 lug nuts. And as you mentioned, Nate, it doesn't have to be 2 on 1 tire. It'd be 2 as part of the total. So 1 on the left front and 1 on the right rear, that is going to be a $10,000 fine. And then if you have 17 or fewer safe and secure, that is going to be a DQ. So I believe they had 4 off the car on Bonsignor's number 19 car. And so typically what happens is we do a lug nut check after the race. So we have the cool down lap, the cars come to pit road, and there is at the front of pit road officials checking each lug nut, and then they send them on their way. And if there is a lug nut off, we take a photo just in case if they wanted to do an appeal, they can appeal this penalty, for instance. If they wanted to appeal, then we would have that photographic proof that indeed they had X amount of lug nuts off the car. So we wait to do that at the end of the race. This is kind of a unique situation that I don't remember ever happening. I'm sure it has, but the
I
car
think
got
it's
in a wreck.
happened one other time that I can recall.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the car got in the wreck, went to the garage. The DVP policy in the Xfinity series still says if you take a wrecked race car into the garage, you're out. You can't fix it. And when they took to the garage, they did a lug nut check there because the race was over. That particular car's race was over, and noticed that there were multiple lug nuts off the car. So they did not hit either. They did not hit or missed lug nuts on that, whatever the most recent stop was. So because of that, their race was over. That's 17 or fewer. I believe they had 16 on the car at that point, and that is an automatic DQ. So then the other big penalty was obviously to the race winning car of the number 2 of Jesse Love, and that came in post race teardown. So kind of a unique circumstance. Yeah, I don't know about unique, but we always take 3 cars to be torn down post race. So you get the winning car, the second place finisher, and then a random. And so what we do, and we could take 2 randoms. There's, I think, last few races we may have done 2 randoms, and just to get a feel for the garage. Eric Peterson, NASCAR managing director for the Xfinity series. This is his first season, so he is getting a feel for the garage. I believe the last couple of races, like I said, he's taken more than 1 random just to really get some data points on the garage, see where his garage is at. So, but typically it's the winner, P2, and then a random. And so we'll tear down the winner. If they're good, great. High fives all around. P2, good. Random, good. And then, there's a note that's sent out to the media and reported to the fans that says post-race inspections done, all clear, no issues. Have a great weekend, everybody. That was not the case this time around, where there was an infraction on the rear end, the suspension parts. And I believe we have the press conference from Eric Peterson. We had a little bit of a media scrum. So whenever there's a DQ, we typically want to have the managing director talk about what exactly was found and go into some detail, answer a couple questions from media members to help the fans understand exactly what was found and how it was found and what that infraction is. So I believe we have some audio of Eric, and we can play that right now.
Okay, unfortunately, at the end of the race and post-race teardown, 2 car of Jesse Love for RCR failed post-race inspection. So the rule that they violated was 14.14.2 I5.H. So that's truck trailing arm spacers and pinion angle shims is the area of that rule. And that way that rule reads is all mating surfaces between the truck trailing arms and the U-bolt saddle must be in complete contact with each other at all times. And unfortunately, that was not the case when we did the teardown on the 2 car, and they were disqualified.
So was there movement back in there then?
Well, yeah. When those parts are together, that could potentially happen. So it's just an appealable infraction, so we can't go into too much details on it. But yeah, those parts are all together for sure, and need to be tight and touching each other the whole time.
You say appealable or unappealable?
It is appealable,
It is
yes.
appealable.
Did you expect them to?
I'm not really sure. So yeah, we'll have to wait and see. They have a little period of time before they have to decide that, and they're digesting it right now. So we'll have to wait and see what they say.
And the 8 car was fully torn down.
Yeah, the 8 car did full tear down and passed inspection.
This is an excellent time to bring on producer John Hayes for the first time on Holler Talk.
Well, it's great to be here, and I think it was a fantastic return to Rockingham. And the Charlotte Observer this morning, it said Rockingham's revival weekend was a huge success. And I asked the question, was it, when you have an Xfinity winner not pass inspection, and you got everybody leaves the track and thinks they've seen Jesse Love and the 2 car get the job done. If you just so happen to, I don't know, you might know somebody that watched the race on replay on Sunday. The broadcast signs off on CW with Jesse Love as the Xfinity winner. In a situation like this, Mike, what's the solution? Amanda, what is the solution here? Obviously, you want to get it right. Do you point towards the team? When I hear you and I hear Eric Peterson talk about the infraction, I've got to be honest, it sounds like a different language to me. So I think my first question would be like, how egregious was this from the number 2 team this weekend? And what is this solution to a team bending the rules a little bit and potentially ruining what was a good race weekend?
Yeah, I think I'd love all three of us to have a comment on this one, because I think, and they can take us home on sort of the history of how we handled infractions found post race. So as far as egregious, the levels of egregiousness, NASCAR doesn't really judge that. It was a violation of the rule book. This was an aerodynamic advantage. What we found, if and teams are, can engineer certain parts and pieces to do this exact thing and hope it gets across the line, and this one didn't. So all the surfaces had to be intact all throughout the race, and they were not. So I think the penalty is pretty clear. It is a DQ. Seems like a pretty massive a penalty, obviously, going from first to 38th or 37th, whatever the field size was. I think doing it how we do it now, not the best case scenario. But Amanda, if you want to break down of how we used to do it and how we do it now, and I think you got to pick the lesser of two evils, which I feel like is this one.
Well, fans already say that I'm too harsh on the team, so I want to be
That's why we're bringing.
careful.
Right.
I know. Be
Yes.
careful how much I dive into this here. But, back when I started, Ford, I think it would be the same for when you started as well. Here at NASCAR, teardown really happened at the R&D center. So you would load up cars post event, and they would, essentially make their way back to the R&D center. People would all hop on airplanes and go home. And really the exit from the track was fairly quick. The race was over. That's kind of how the day ended. And then Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, depending on the schedule for the week, teardown would take place, and then winners were determined, more through that process. If someone was still essentially, considered the winner, they were still given the race win in that scenario, but, would often obviously have penalties related to points, money, things like that we have today. So, yeah, I think the biggest thing that I'll flip it over to Nate here in just a second for him to kind of dive into some more of the history that he's covered in his career when it comes to post-race tech. But I think the one thing for fans to know is tech is not a quick process. This is a process that takes time, and that is, often why you do hear later in the evening that a car has been disqualified, specifically a race winner. It's something that our officials take very seriously, and they, make sure that if they think an infraction has occurred, they make sure that they're confident in that before we would, ever DQ a car in that situation. So it's a process that takes typically hour and a half, 2 hours, depending on the situation. And ultimately, that's what transpired on Saturday night. And Nate, if you can take our listeners through a little bit of your career in covering post race tech and wins and all the things.
Yeah, sure. I'm happy to, but at the same time, not really, because this is going to dredge up some really unpleasant memories for me and media brethren who were covering NASCAR at this time, and for NASCAR as well. But thanks, Amanda and Ford, for those were good explanations. But I'm going to start with emphasizing what John said about the Charlotte Observer's coverage of Rockingham. I thought it was outstanding, especially some great pieces by Alex Zetlow. I haven't been to Rockingham personally since 2004, since the last race there in Cup, February 2004, where Matt Kenseth beat Casey Kane in a nail-biter finish. And all the coverage I read in the Observer from Alex and everybody made me wish that I had been there this past weekend, and secretly makes me wish that I hope I get to go there for a Cup race again someday. So kudos. As you know, I'm a former newspaper person, so I'm always going to send plaudits to newspaper people for good coverage, and the Observer did a really good job from Rockingham. So now let's talk about the ugly R&D stuff. So Amanda, I think, explained it really well. It used to be in that era pre-2019. 2019 is when NASCAR changed its policy and said, okay, starting this season, now we're going to disqualify winners within 2 to 3 hours after the race. We're going to inspect and just do it and be done with it. I believe that the R&D center inspections on Tuesday, Wednesdays, those midweek inspections were a byproduct of the Car of Tomorrow being introduced in 2007, which resulted in a more kind of complicated process, and it just took longer. It was this dramatic overhaul of the car that NASCAR had used for essentially 2 decades to that point. So they were taking cars back to the R&D Center in Concord, North Carolina, which of course is far from many of the races, Tuesdays and Wednesdays. But sometimes on those Tuesdays and Wednesdays, our afternoons would unpleasantly be interrupted with penalties involving race winners or people who had finished like in the top 5. It essentially would remove what you had seen without removing the win. Like, and John's right. Like, a lot of it sounds like another language when we talk. And I understand that it has to be that way in the rule book. But when we talk about planar services mating correctly, it's really deep in the weeds, and it's really kind of hard to explain in layman's terms. And again, I understand why it has to be that way. We're talking about a sport that has literally tens of thousands of parts and pieces that make their vehicles work correctly. There's all sorts of technical stuff involved with it. So I get it. It made it confusing and a little complicated, to be candid. And it also produced one of the most unfortunate terms in the history of NASCAR vernacular, which was encumbered. Which is what
That's right.
If you
And
won a
we
race,
all hated that word.
encumbered meant that if you won a race and then on Tuesday and Wednesday, your car was found to be illegal in some way at the R&D Center, you kept the win, but the win was encumbered, which meant it didn't count toward the playoffs, I believe. Like, you lost like your playoff points, you lost your playoff eligibility. The point at which I really remember this jumping the shark was when Joey Logano won at Richmond in 2017 and had a very similar penalty to what we're talking about today. It was planar surfaces mating. You can go and look this up. That victory becomes encumbered, and it was not great for NASCAR. And then the next year, Kevin Harvick won at Texas Motor Speedway in the playoffs in 2018, and that victory was encumbered, which meant that, to John's point, we had spent 2 days discussing like, oh, this is great. What a win for Happy. He wins at Texas. He advances to the championship 4. And then 2 days later, we find out, no, actually that win, even though it still is a win, it didn't really count toward him advancing the championship 4. He had to make the championship 4 on points. Oh, and he lost his crew chief, Rodney Childers, for the next few races, including the championship race. It was not a great storyline. And that's part of the reason why NASCAR changed this, I believe. 2 reasons. One, again, it was very confusing, very complicated to have like, okay, your win still counts in the record books, but it doesn't count in some other ways that are important. And then 2, what I'm talking about just now is it dominated the narrative. It dominated the midweek narrative. In 2019, NASCAR announced that they were going to change the policy, and it was going to be when the race ended, they were going to inspect immediately. And if they found something illegal, they were going to DQ the winner. And that was a sea change in the way they'd done things for some decades. Because to John's point, the mantra from Bill France Sr. onward was always, we want fans to know who the winner was when they leave the track or when they turn off their TV. And now NASCAR was entering this era when that was no longer the case. You could go to a race, to John's point, you could leave Rockingham, you could turn off your TV, and then find out the next time you turn down social media or the news or whatever, you find out that the guy you thought won the race didn't win the race. And that has its problems. But I think for all of the reasons I just listed, hopefully people understand that like the other way of doing things is also fraught with a lot of its own problems. So that is a not too brief history of how NASCAR ended up where it did.
Neither way is awesome, because you're talking about cheating and illegal parts and mating surfaces and things like that, which is tough to understand. So we want to get the storylines of the drivers and Jesse Love, this young star who's had a cup start already and is going to be around the sport for decades, hopefully winning. That's what we want to talk about. But this is the other part of NASCAR that people really geek out over as well. So it's part of the deal. We have to make sure that the field is all completely competitive and balanced, and inspection is part of that. So not the greatest, most fun storyline ever, but to your point, Nate, I think how we do it now is much, much better. Okay, so 2 off-track topics that would have been overshadowed if there was an encumbered finish, and that is the NASCAR Hall of Fame and the NASCAR All-Star race. So there's going to be two announcements. One has already happened, and that is the NASCAR Hall of Fame nominees. And so part of that is, which is pretty cool, I really do enjoy this part of it, is that fans do have a voice in this. I believe we're the only sport that does this, but if you go to NASCAR.com right now, you can vote on the NASCAR Hall of Fame. And so who you want to be in that, it's going to be on Tuesday, May 20th. So if you go to NASCAR.com / Hall of Fame, you can vote who you want to join the NASCAR Hall of Fame, and your vote will count. And that is going to be one of the votes cast as the fan vote. So here are the nominees. Well, first off, here are the new nominees. So I think Winston Kelly, if you listen to Sirius XM, The Morning Drive, Monday morning, he laid this out pretty well. It's not a guarantee that if you were on the ballot last year, that you would be automatically put on the ballot the following year. But that is what happened in this case. But there are two new members to the nominee list, and those two new members are Kurt Busch. Just some process here. You have to be out of the sport for 2 years. So his final year, obviously, was because of injury, unfortunately, but that was 2022. So 2023, 2024, he did not race. So he is now on the ballot. 2004 NASCAR Cup Series champion, 2017 Daytona 500 winner. Pretty easy choice to land on this nominee list. And then also Randy LaJoie, two-time Xfinity Series champion, 1985 Busch North Series champion. Great career. Obviously, was a pioneer in seat safety as well. Those are the two new names to the ballot: Greg Biffle, Neil Bonnet, Tim Brewer, Jeff Burton, Kurt Busch, like I said, Randy Dorton, Harry Gant, Harry Hyde, Randy LaJoie, as I mentioned, and then Jack Sprague. So those are the nominees who are going to be voted upon. Two members of that list will be voted upon on May 20th. For eventual entry into the NASCAR Hall of Fame. TBD on what that induction date will be. Usually it's at the end of January, beginning of February. So that is the modern era ballot. Nate, you have a vote. Any immediate thoughts on what was announced on Monday morning?
I actually can immediately tell you who I'm voting for.
Okay.
Which I'm sure will go over really well with many fans who are probably disappointed that I've already made my mind up. But my policy is forward, and you explained it well. Like, the nominees don't transfer year to year, but generally they stay the same, which makes it easier for me. So last year I voted for Jeff Burton, Ricky Rudd, Banjo Matthews, Dr. Dean Sicking. Those are my four votes. So Burton didn't get elected. So my policy is, if I vote for you, and barring somebody new coming on the ballot, like the year Jimmy Johnson and Chad Knaus came in, I think I wasn't able to do it that year. But for the most part, if I vote for you and the next year there aren't new nominees that I feel like eliminate you from consideration for me, you keep your vote. So I'm voting for Jeff Burton again. Ricky Rudd obviously got inducted last year, so that means I have to pick someone new. And in my mind, I mean, Kurt Busch is a no-brainer. I mean, he's the only Cup champion on this list, and won the Daytona 500 in 2017, and I think is top 25 in wins. So to me, that's a lead pipe cinch. That's easy. And then Banjo Matthews remains on the Pioneer ballot. So I voted for him last year, so I will vote for Banjo Matthews again. And I guess I somewhat fibbed. Like, I'm not entirely 100% sure on the landmark, because Dr. Dean Sicking obviously he was the choice last year, so he's in. So I'll have to look at these five. I have some history with Les Richter from his days at California Speedway, and I'm a big Humpy Wheeler fan. But they're all certainly deserving candidates. So I will look at all of those and make a selection.
Well, I will say, Nate, I was had the opportunity. I think I mentioned this earlier in a podcast when we were talking to Amber Wells, but had the opportunity to be in the room when this process was kicking off and the nominees were being discussed. And I will say this: I do not envy your job of having to choose who to vote for, because it's gosh, when you sit in there and listen to all the things and the stories, and I'm sure it's tough at times, because there are some great we've been lucky in our sport to have some great drivers and team members, and to your point, promoter like Humpy Wheeler. Like, there's been a lot of those great contributors, I think is probably the proper term, to our sport. And that was a really cool process to have a chance to sit in on. I'm excited to see what voting day will bring.
Yeah, I've been privileged, Amanda, to be in every Hall of Fame discussion since the first one in 2009, and it is fascinating. Like the people who will stand up and make cases for certain people, or just the things you hear, things you learn. It's a pretty fascinating discussion. I've taken copious notes, which I'm glad I have on every
Yeah.
one of those panel discussions. And yeah, like you said, I mean, Amber Wells was on last week to discuss how it works, and or 2 weeks ago, and I thought she provided a good glimpse, a good window into it, and it'll be really interesting to see what comes out of May 20th.
Looking forward to it. Well, the good news is, Nate, once all that happens and we know who gets elected to be inducted in the Hall of Fame, you'll have to give us, within reason of what you're allowed to give us, an inside look into
they
at least
make
for the
us sign.
listeners.
I think Amber alluded to this. They make us sign NDAs.
Yeah.
Like we're not allowed to talk about or tweet, which isn't a problem for me anymore. You're not allowed to like post social media during this session, which is really good, I think. And you're allowed to speak generally about things, but yeah, you're not allowed to sort of identify who said what.
You can't identify who said what. Yeah. No, they make you sign. I witnessed that. They make you sign the NDAs. You have to actually like authenticate your signature and all the things. So it's a really neat process, and I look forward to fans being able to see kind of what comes of, like Ford said, May 20th. May is a busy month in the NASCAR world. Like, we have Hall of Fame, we have the NASCAR All-Star Race coming up, and I think we have an opportunity to tell our fans and listeners a little bit about what this year's format will look like.
Yeah, some breaking news. We will announce, so as this podcast drops, the NASCAR Hall of Fame for 2025, the 2025 NASCAR All-Star Race format will be just announced. So here we go. Here's what it is. And it is pretty similar to the past years, but there's some pretty good, pretty interesting tweaks to it, I think, anyway. So I think this might be news for a lot of people here. So, Nate, I know you haven't heard this. Amanda, you have. First, the new stuff. The good news here, I was sitting in the stands and last year, and the 200-lap race was great, but I did want more. And this year, there will be more. There will be 250 laps in this race. So it goes from 200 to 250 laps. Prior to the race, there will be a qualifying and a pit crew challenge like we did last year. But this year, every single team that's entered either in the Open or in the All-Star race will be eligible to compete in the pit crew challenge. And it is going to be the same format as previous years, where the car takes a lap, comes in, 4-tire change, leaves again, and once it hits the start finish line, that's going to be your time. And so the winner of the pit crew challenge also gets pit selection. That's how we're going to set the pit box selection order as well. So when we get to the race itself, 250 lap race, like I said, there'll be a break at or around lap 100. And then here's a little bit of a unique twist. There will be what's being called as a promoter's caution. So Marcus Smith, the promoter of the race for Speedway Motorsports, from lap 100 to lap 220, he can throw a caution whenever he wants. So this is going to be his choice. It should be a pretty fun, interesting little storyline within the race. If Kyle Larson gets too far out, gets a 4 or 5 second lead, as long as it's prior to lap 220, Marcus can hit the button, and we're going to re-rack them and restart and bunch them up again for the final charge to the finish line and the $1 million. So the only caveat to that is that if there is a natural caution after lap 200, then the promoter's caution will be nulled. We won't be having a caution, say, on lap 201 and then another one on lap 212 or whatever that is. And then once you pass lap 220, then it's going to be a natural race, and those final 30 laps will be however they're run. So if there is a caution, then obviously we'll throw it and then re-rack them and have a restart. But if not, and it goes clean and green to the end of the race, that'll be good too. And then one other kind of cool note. This is something that this is going to be the first time we've ever done this. We're going to have something called the Manufacturers Showdown. So this is a race within a race. And what the manufacturer's showdown is, it's going to be putting a spotlight on Chevrolet, Ford, and Toyota, the OEM brands that pour so much into this sport, and it's a really an opportunity to highlight those. And there are fans out there that I'm a Chevy guy, I'm a Ford guy, I'm a Toyota guy, and I only root for those teams. Now they're going to have an opportunity to really root for those teams because there is going to be sort of a team set. So how this is going to work is after the Open, we're going to figure out how many Toyotas they're going to be in the field, because right now I believe they're guaranteed to have the fewest amount of entries into the All-Star race. So let's say they'll have 5 Toyota cars in the main event. We'll take those 5 Toyota cars, the top 5 starting Ford cars, and the top 5 starting Chevrolet cars, and then they're going to battle out within the race. So that is, in a nutshell, what the All-Star format is. Again, North Wilkesboro Speedway on May 18th. It's going to be a packed weekend. We're going to have the Cars Tour, I think, Thursday and Friday, live on FS1 on Friday evening. We're going to have the truck race on Saturday afternoon, and then a packed schedule on Sunday with the Open, a modified race, and the main event, the All-Star race, on Sunday night. So a lot of chock full on-track activity for North Wilkesboro Speedway that weekend.
Yeah, Ford, as you mentioned, we went last year and actually sat in the stands for the All-Star race, and it was probably one of my favorite memories of the 2024 season was having a chance to be a fan and experience that from that perspective. And it was a ton of fun. I think there's a lot of energy, as you mentioned, that week, just from going from North Wilkesboro to the Coke 600. And then obviously we'll have the opportunity to watch Kyle Larson once again try the double. So I think that week in general is a lot of fun. There's a lot of news that kind of comes in and out of that week. And I encourage fans, if they have the opportunity to go to an all-star race, I think it's one of the more fun events we have because it's a little bit non-conventional to what we do. And Marcus and his team do a great job there at North Wilkesboro putting that event on.
Yeah, and obviously I'm just digesting all of this on the fly, and I think that the purpose of an all-star race is to be somewhat gimmicky. I think this is the one time when NASCAR should be gimmicky. Say what you will about that word, but it's one that gets tossed around with some derision, pejoratively used in the auto racing space, not just with NASCAR, but with other series. But I think this is one instance in which gimmicky works. And of course, the thing that stands out to me from everything Ford just explained about this format is the promoter's caution. And I think it's great that the All-Star race is held at a Speedway Motorsports track, and that if it is Marcus Smith who's making this call, which I hope it is, because who better than the son of Bruton Smith than to determine when a caution gets thrown during an all-star race? I'm pretty sure, at least for me, in my time covering NASCAR, Bruton Smith was the first person I heard who advocated the use of intentional cautions during races. He felt like it was something NASCAR should pursue as a strategy to spice things up during races. So don't know if this is a tribute in a way, offhandedly, to Bruton Smith, but I think certainly present an interesting wrinkle in this year's All-Star.
Yeah, you're right. And I think that has sort of come, remember I saw something on social media where Carl Edwards was talking about it when he was active competitor about doing that. And I think he was anti, but obviously that eventually led to stages, and that wasn't exactly the reasoning behind it. It wasn't because Bruton said we needed to do this, but it was kind of a collaborative situation there. But yeah, that's a really interesting take. And I don't know what the mechanism, how we're going to do it yet. I think Speedway Motorsports has some fun ideas on exactly how Marcus is going to make that call. But yeah, it should be pretty interesting. I'm excited to see how that's going to play out.
Before we wrap here today, and I just felt like, Nate, if you don't mind to share, obviously last week, the week of, leading into Bristol, we lost 2 members of our NASCAR community on the same day. And it was a very, very sad day. One being a longtime reporter, Al Pearce, who I know you had the opportunity to work alongside, and then a dear friend for all of us in John Edwards, who had worked in the sport across 3 decades, I believe it was. And John was someone that, we worked closely with on our side, especially when it came to booking media avails and things like that, and just in general. And Nate, I know John was someone you had the chance to get to know for many years, including dating back to, Jeff's career. And I just felt like we should at least, I don't know, share a few memories of them before we officially wrap today, because they both impacted all of us in such a way.
Yeah, sure. I appreciate the opportunity, Matt. First, I'll just say I don't root for drivers, but I do root for storylines when I'm covering races. And when I was covering Bristol, of course, I was rooting for the Kyle Larson storyline because I felt like that was most apt, because John Edwards also was Kyle Larson's PR person when Larson joined Hendrick in 2021. And so for Larson to win that race, even though I know that we already talked about it wasn't maybe the greatest Bristol race for many, many NASCAR fans, in my opinion, the right guy won because it was a perfect tribute to John Edwards. I won't say too much other than I wrote something for NASCAR.com about Hendrick and John Edwards, and pretty much everything I would say about John is in that story. But I'll just say that when I moved to Uptown Charlotte about 15 years ago, John Edwards was one of the people who welcomed me and made me feel very, very at home in my new surroundings. And I'll dearly miss him. I mean, as a person and as a professional, he was top notch. And then for Al Pearce, 56 consecutive Daytona 500s, which I think will never probably be broken for a sports writer. Yeah. And he obviously was a giant in the media center for many, many decades and was a mentor to Jeff Gluck and I think some other writers. I didn't start. My second job in newspapers was at the Richmond Times-Dispatch. When I started covering NASCAR full-time, I was at the Richmond Times-Dispatch. And Al, of course, wrote for a very, very long time for the Newport News Daily Press, in addition to writing for Auto Week and some other publications. But I vividly remember a drag racing event, actually, in Dinwiddie, Virginia, south of Richmond, where I sat next to Al Pearce for about 5 or 6 hours, because that's usually how drag racing events go. And I had the chance to learn a lot from him. This was shortly before I became a full-time NASCAR writer. I had a chance to learn a lot from him and tell him how much I liked his writing, because I've been reading it in Auto Week for a few years at that point. And he was very gracious with his time and put up with my probably stupid questions from a 20-something kid at the time. So Al will be dearly missed, just as John is.
Agree. That was one of the, to your point, Nate, I mean, I think, like you said, like Bristol was a dominating performance from Larson and his team, but I think it was, definitely what, the industry really, I think, in some ways felt fitting that, the five team won that weekend. And then also just for all of our friends and, at Hendrick Motorsports, I think it was definitely a nice way to end what had been a really hard weekend. It was one of those weekends where there was a lot of people telling stories and kind of just, sitting around at times and kind of processing what that week had held. And I think it was just a reminder that as much as sometimes we love to banter and have different opinions, and the NASCAR community is one big family, and that's how Bristol felt. It felt much like one big family reunion, but we were obviously missing two people that meant a lot to us. So thanks for sharing those, Nate. We really appreciate that. I know that we have John's services, this week, and I know we'll see some familiar faces at those as well.
Yeah, well said. And just reiterate to everyone to check out Nate's story on NASCAR.com. I thought he did an outstanding job really capturing who John was. And, and I love what Amanda just said there. It's, you look at, there was some word that I texted you about, Nate, enigmatic, maybe, I think was the word that you used to describe John. And there were several people.
It was enigmatic.
Yeah. And there were several people who mentioned this, that John was, why he was such a good pro was that he was so buttoned up and prepped and stuck. And someone mentioned it may have been you, Nate, about how if you had a schedule set for Jeff Gordon and you went over it, you would have to hear about it. And John would not let you go a minute over that schedule. He was so buttoned up. And there are several people that mentioned that John, it was Nate, I think it was Ryan McGee maybe. And he, if you butted head with John, that was probably par for the course, because he was like, no, I didn't do anything wrong here. This is on you. You guys, you're the one who screwed up here. And I think a lot of people had that. And then, but then the next day you're like, it's over, and you were best buds again. And that was just kind of how we went about his business and his life. And that's how why so many people like were so shook by this, because you lost one of the true pros in the garage, one of the really good people who you can have a beer with and have a laugh with and talk about anything but racing. Or if you wanted to talk about racing, you could do that, because my man was a diehard race fan. But I say all that to say, Amanda, I think you nailed it. Like, we're going to get mad at each other. You're going to be annoyed by something someone said. And it's almost like a familial, like how you get mad at your sister or brother or something like that. But in the end, you're really going to put your arm around them. And it was really beautiful to see all the nice comments and kind words, and really beautiful memories about John and Al over that weekend, because Al was the same thing. I think Jeff Gluck, during the cranky years of Al at the end there, but he wasn't cranky. He was just, he felt like he put in his time and should be treated a certain way, and he should have, and he was right in a lot of those instances. But I just loved seeing how everyone kind of came together and remembered these two really giants in their respective industries in a way they did, and it made me really proud to be part of the NASCAR industry.
Yeah, I had the chance to actually work closely with John these, kind of previous couple weeks. And we assisted with the unveil that Hendrick Motorsports did with McLaren in unveiling what will be Larson's paint schemes for both the Indy 500 and the Coke 600. And that was actually was done at NASCAR Productions. And so we had, several meetings leading up to that and in the day of the event. And one of the last things John said to me that day, and I've laughed about it a couple of times because it just reminds me a lot of like who John was, is he was, saying, hey, it was great. It was wonderful. This was all the things, like, thank you so much for your work. But man, this one thing would have made it perfect. This one thing, if we could have done this, it would have been perfect. And I've laughed about that because John was like the one guy who could give you constructive criticism and you like don't take it personal or offensively. Like it was like, no, he's right. That would have made it perfect. And so I think in a lot of ways, as much as we'll just miss John as a human and a friend and someone who a lot of people in our industry were close to, I'll miss his critiques at times, because he was really great at holding us to a certain bar. And I've laughed about that conversation a couple of times since then, because, that was his way of saying this was good, but it could have been better, But, well, I think we have covered a lot of things for what was essentially a Cup off week and leading into a great event at Rockingham. Nate, you brought this up, but I just think it is worth mentioning what fun that was to watch from afar, to see all the stands with fans back in them, and the efforts that I know went in from both the track side and the NASCAR side and the teams and everyone who made the drivers, everyone who made that weekend a success. I think that, it was really fun, and I hope that it's something that can continue, especially for the Truck and Xfinity series. I think it was a great weekend for them to hold that banner while, Cup took that one off week. Now 28 weeks back, and we'll have all 28 here on the hauler talk.
Yep. So appreciate you guys hanging with us and through the off week, and big race in Talladega Super Speedway this weekend. Back to a Super Speedway pack racing. Should be typically thrilling event. So tune in there on Fox. It's going to be back on Big Fox this Sunday evening for the NASCAR Cup Series. So big time race. And if you have any questions for next week's episode, please hit us up on social media at mford on X, MFORDE. Amanda, as always, Amanda M. Ellis. And if you have a question for Nate, hit him up on Facebook on his Nate Ryan journalist page. So always want to answer these questions, love getting them, and helping out where we can on providing some clarity for everything NASCAR on NASCAR's hottest new podcast.
See you next week.